I'm 19 years old now, and I'm finally ready to talk about what happened to me last year. I've kept it bottled up because it's the kind of thing people don't believe when you say it out loud. It sounds too messed up to be real, but it happened. Every single part of it. A year ago, I gave birth to a baby girl. I was 18, still in high school, terrified, and completely unprepared. But I knew from the second I found out I was pregnant that I wanted to keep her. The father wasn't in the picture. He ghosted me before I even hit the second trimester. But I didn't care. I was going to be a mom. I was scared, but determined. The thing is, I didn't grow up in the most supportive environment. My mom passed away when I was 10, and my dad remarried a woman named Leanne when I was 12. She came off as this perfect suburban mom, bubbly, religious, always volunteering for school events. But behind closed doors, she was cold. Everything had to be about her, her rules, her image, her family. I always felt like an inconvenience in her house. My dad was one of those guys who hates conflict. He wasn't abusive or anything, but he let Leanne run the house like she was the warden of a prison. So when I told them I was pregnant, I didn't expect a warm welcome. I just didn't expect what actually happened. They were furious. Not disappointed, furious. Leanne especially. She told me I had embarrassed the family, ruined my future, and that no respectable household would allow an unwed teen mother to raise a baby under their roof. I was still finishing my senior year, so I begged them to let me stay until I graduated. They agreed, but with conditions. I wasn't allowed to talk about the pregnancy to anyone outside the house. No baby shower, no social media posts, nothing that could damage the family name. Leanne's word. When I started showing, they made me stay home from school entirely, claimed I was sick and homeschooled for the rest of the year. It was isolating, humiliating, and honestly, I was miserable. But I held on, knowing it was only temporary. Once the baby came, I could find work, maybe get state housing, build a life. I had no idea that Leanne had already made other plans, ones that didn't include me at all. I gave birth at 37 weeks. It was a difficult delivery. There were complications, and I passed out right after. I remember the doctor saying something about needing to transfer me, and everything went black. I woke up 2 days later in a private recovery room, alone, no baby, and when I asked where my daughter was, that's when everything started to unravel. I'm 19 years old now, and I'm finally ready to talk about what happened to me last year. I've kept it bottled up because it's the kind of thing people don't believe when you say it out loud. It sounds too messed up to be real, but it happened. Every single part of it. A year ago, I gave birth to a baby girl. I was 18, still in high school, terrified, completely unprepared. But I knew from the second I found out I was pregnant that I wanted to keep her. The father wasn't in the picture. He ghosted me before I even hit the second trimester, but I didn't care. I was going to be a mom. I was scared, but determined. The thing is, I didn't grow up in the most supportive environment. My mom passed away when I was 10, and my dad remarried a woman named Leanne when I was 12. She came off as this perfect suburban mom, bubbly, religious, always volunteering for school events, but behind closed doors she was cold. Everything about her, her rules, her image, her family. I always felt like an inconvenience in her house. My dad was one of those guys who hates conflict. He wasn't abusive or anything, but he let Leanne run the house like she was the warden of a prison. So when I told them I was pregnant, I just didn't expect what actually happened. They were furious. Not disappointed, furious. Leanne especially. She told me I had embarrassed the family, ruined my future, and that no respectable household would allow an unwed teen mother to raise a baby under their roof. I was still finishing my senior year, so I begged them to let me stay until I graduated. They agreed, but with conditions. I wasn't allowed to talk about the pregnancy to anyone outside the house. No baby shower, no social media posts, nothing that could damage the family name. Leanne's words, not mine. And when I started showing, they made me stay home from school entirely, claimed I was sick and homeschooled me for the rest of the year. It was isolating, humiliating, and honestly, I was miserable. But I held on, knowing it was only temporary. Once the baby came, I could find work, maybe get state housing, build a life. I had no idea that Leanne had already made other plans, ones that didn't include me at all. I gave birth at 37 weeks. It was a difficult delivery. There were complications and I passed out right after. I remember the doctor saying something about needing to transfer me, and everything went black. I woke up 2 days later in a private recovery room, alone, no baby, and when I asked where my daughter was, that's when everything started to unravel. 8 months. That's how long I walked around thinking my daughter was dead. 8 months of trying to rebuild my life, carrying a grief that never settled right in my chest. It wasn't like normal grief. It was itchy, wrong. Like there was something off about the entire story, but I didn't have the pieces to figure it out. After I was discharged, I stopped talking about the baby. Leanne made sure of that. She kept a close eye on everything. My mail, my texts, even my emails. Any time I cried or brought up the name I'd chosen, Mira, she'd scold me like I was talking about a fantasy. You need to move on. Don't dwell on what's already gone. So, I stuffed it down. I started working part-time at a local grocery store, saving what I could. slowly putting together a plan to move out. Leanne said I could stay as long as I stayed respectful, which basically meant don't make noise, don't ask questions, and definitely don't bring up the baby. Then something strange happened. One of our neighbors, Mrs. Cormack, an older lady who'd known me since I was a kid, came into my aisle at the store. She looked confused when she saw me. She asked how I was doing and said she was surprised to see me working again, so soon. I thought she meant the pregnancy, so I just nodded awkwardly and said I was doing better. But then she smiled and said something I'll never forget. I saw Leanne at the park last week. That baby is just precious. You must be so proud. My blood ran cold. I asked her what she meant and she laughed a little and said, your new little sister. Or cousin? I don't know how you guys are doing things these days. She's adorable. I don't remember how I finished that. I don't remember clocking out or getting home. All I remember is the buzzing in my ears and this wild, clawing instinct in my chest that said something was very, very wrong. That night, I waited until Leanne and my dad were asleep, snuck into the living room, and opened her laptop. She always kept it with her, but that day, by some miracle, she left it charging on the side table. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just clicked through folders, emails, anything, and then I saw it. A digital copy of an adoption certificate filed 6 months ago. Adoptive parents, Leanne and Richard. Adoptee, infant female, born on the exact day I gave birth. Birth mother, anonymous. My heart dropped. Anonymous? How the hell was I anonymous? I couldn't stop shaking. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen, as I stared at the word anonymous, like it was some kind of cosmic joke. I was the birth mother. I carried her. I delivered her. And yet, somehow, legally, I didn't exist. It felt like a punch to the chest, and I had no one to tell, no one to trust. I copied the file and emailed it to myself. Then I kept digging. The deeper I went, the worse it got. There were email threads between Leanne and some private adoption attorney. The language was cold, transactional. It was clear this had been planned for months, before I gave birth. She'd been working behind the scenes, contacting lawyers, creating a paper trail, all while pretending to help me through the pregnancy. There were even medical forms, signed by me, except I never signed them. The forms were agreements, terminating my parental rights due to emotional instability and consent to relinquish custody, but I'd never seen them in my life. My signature was on them, but I didn't write it. I know my own handwriting. It was a near-perfect fake, but not perfect enough. Leanne had forged everything. That's when it all clicked. The silence in the hospital. The way no one let me see my baby. The discharge process that felt rushed. She'd drugged me, or bribed someone, or both. And while I was unconscious, she signed my daughter away, to herself. I was shaking so badly I had to put the laptop down. I sat on the floor in the dark, trying not to scream, trying not to pass out. Because in that moment I realized something truly horrifying. My daughter wasn't dead. She was alive. She was living in the same city, maybe even the same neighborhood, and she was being raised to believe that Leanne was her mother. I wanted to run, to barge into their room and scream, but I couldn't. Not yet. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have proof that would stand in court. Leanne had covered her tracks. Legally, on paper, she was the mother, and I was just the girl who had emotionally broken down after a stillbirth. The best I could do that night was quietly close the laptop, sneak back into my room, and pretend nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I knew the truth now, and no matter how long it took, I was going to get my daughter back. The next morning, I couldn't look at Leanne the same way. She was humming in the kitchen, making coffee, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't stolen an entire human life from me, like she hadn't orchestrated a lie so massive it rewrote my reality. She even smiled at me and asked if I wanted pancakes. I felt my stomach churn. I played along. I said yes. I even smiled back. Because now I had to be smart. I couldn't let her see the shift. Not yet. That entire day, my head was spinning with one question. How do I prove the truth? I didn't have money. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't even have access to my own medical records. Everything had gone through Leanne or my dad. I was legally an adult, but still dependent. I had no support system. No one who'd take my side over hers. Especially not my dad, who worshipped the ground she walked on. But I had one card left to play. The nurse. I didn't remember her name, but I remembered her face. The soft smile. The hesitation in her eyes when she told me to take it easy. Something about her hadn't felt right. Like she wanted to say more, but couldn't. If anyone had seen something, heard something, maybe even questioned what happened, it would have been her. So that afternoon, I told Leanne I was going to a friend's place after work. She didn't ask questions. Why would she? In her mind, I was beaten, broken, obedient. Her perfect little cover-up was safe. Instead of going to my friend's, I took the bus to the hospital. The nurse's station looked totally different in the daytime, with people rushing in every direction. I walked up to the desk and asked if someone named Marta, the only name I vaguely remembered, had worked in maternity 8 months ago. The woman at the desk gave me a weird look, asked me to wait, and went into the back. A few minutes later, there she was. Marta. Same calm face, same tired eyes. She recognized me instantly, and when she saw me, her whole face dropped. I told her I had questions about my delivery, that something didn't feel right, that I never got to see my baby, and that I didn't understand how everything had happened so fast. She looked around, pulled me aside into a supply room, and shut the door. And then, she said something that made my knees buckle. She said she knew. She said after I gave birth, something weird happened. She remembered me being taken to recovery, and then suddenly being transferred without warning. She wasn't allowed to speak to me again. Then a private guardian took over my case. Marta tried to ask questions, but the chart was restricted by court order. Supposedly, she thought maybe it was some foster or protective services case, but when she saw Leanne come in a week later with a baby girl that looked just like me, she knew something was off. She said she wanted to report it, but she had no evidence, no access to the updated files. The system flagged everything as closed, and she didn't want to risk her job. I begged her to help me. I told her the baby was mine. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said something I'll never forget. If you want your daughter back, you need more than feelings. You need facts, hard proof, records, DNA, paper trails, and once you have that, then you come to me again. I nodded, because now I knew what I had to do. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Marta's words kept looping in my head. You need proof. But where the hell was I supposed to get that? Leanne had control of everything, the paperwork, the narrative, even my dad. She was meticulous, obsessed with appearances. I was sure she'd covered her tracks. But then I remembered something. At one of my prenatal appointments, back before I was forced to stop going in person, the nurse had handed me a little welcome pack. Inside it was a thin booklet about prenatal care, some coupons, and a patient ID sticker. Just one of those random barcoded labels with my name, date, and hospital number. It was still in my old school backpack, buried under notebooks and snack wrappers from a year ago. If that sticker still matched the hospital system, I could request my own medical records, without Leanne, without anyone knowing. So that's what I did. I walked into the hospital the next day, hands trembling, and told the front desk I needed a copy of my delivery records for personal reasons. I handed over the ID sticker with my name and DOB. The receptionist looked half asleep and didn't even ask questions. She gave me a form to fill out, said it would take a few days to process. I left feeling like I had just robbed a bank. Back home, I acted normal. I said thank you when Leanne brought me dinner. I asked about her garden. I helped clean the dishes. I even listened to her talk about some church fundraiser Meanwhile, I was hiding a fire inside me. 4 days later, I got a call. My records were ready for pickup. I told Leanne I was working a double shift. Instead, I went straight to the hospital and walked out with an envelope full of my truth. And when I opened it in the park across the street, I found exactly what I needed. Confirmation of live birth. Infant, female, full vitals recorded. Mother, me. Birth time, APGAR scores, first breath. All there. Discharge, blank under infant disposition. No stillbirth, no neonatal death. There was no record of my baby dying. I sat on that park bench, reading the pages over and over, my hands shaking like I was holding a bomb. Because I was. Leanne had lied. Not just to me, but to the hospital, to the government, to the state. She'd falsified a death, falsified custody, faked everything. And now? I had paper proof, but I also had a target on my back. Because if she ever found out I knew, I didn't think she'd just sit quietly and let me undo her fantasy family. I had one shot to do this right, and I needed help. So I made the one phone call I never thought I would make. I called my real mother's sister, Aunt Jenna, and I told her everything. I hadn't spoken to Aunt Jenna in years. After my mom died, she and my dad had a massive falling out. Something about money from a life insurance policy that got ugly and legal. Leanne came into the picture not long after, and like everything else, she rewrote the family narrative. According to her, Jenna was toxic, bitter, and trying to manipulate me. So she got erased from my life, like she never existed. But I remembered her. I remembered her voice. Calm, warm, sharp when it needed to be. She was the one who snuck me candy at the funeral. The one who braided my hair and let me sleep in her bed when the house felt too empty. I didn't even know if she'd want to talk to me, let alone help me. But when I called, she picked up on the second ring. I said her name, and she went quiet. Then she whispered mine, like she didn't believe it was really me. The second I started crying, she told me to come. No questions. No hesitation. Just come. So I did. I packed a bag that, just the essential. Nothing Len would notice. A hoodie, a few changes of clothes, the envelope, my medical records. Then I waited until the house went still and slipped out the back door like a thief in the night. Jenna lived 2 towns over in a little fixer-upper she bought after divorce. The drive was just over an hour, but it felt like I was entering another planet. She opened the door, saw my face, and pulled me into the kind of hug I forgot people gave. I didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes. I just stood there shaking while she rubbed my back like I was 5 again. When I finally told her everything, I expected disbelief. I expected her to tell me I was being paranoid or emotional, but she didn't. She listened, really listened. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're going to burn her whole world to the ground." She didn't care about Leanne's connections or my dad's silence. She had friends, legal ones, lawyers, a retired judge from her book club, a friend who worked in social services. She'd seen cases like this before, women with money and charm and just enough fake tears to manipulate the system. But she said one thing that changed everything. If Leanne forged court documents and submitted them to process a fake adoption, that's not just fraud, that's a felony. And if she claimed you were mentally unstable or unfit without a real evaluation, paused. That's custodial kidnapping. I sat there staring at her, numb. Kidnapping. That word hit me like a bullet. I wasn't just tricked. I wasn't just manipulated. My daughter was stolen. Legally, quietly, cleanly, but stolen all the same. And now that I had the proof, there was no going back. Jenna promised me one thing before I went to sleep that night. You're getting her back, and Leanne's going to wish she never touched your life. The next 2 weeks were a blur of meetings, signatures, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. Jenna didn't waste a second. By the next morning, we were in a lawyer's office. Her friend Malcolm, a semi-retired family attorney with 30 years under his belt, and a face that didn't flinch at anything I told him. He took one look at the documents I'd brought and said, without a shred of hesitation, "You have a case, a strong one." We filed a motion that same week to request full access to the adoption paperwork. Malcolm knew how to frame it. He didn't accuse anyone, just argued that as the alleged birth mother, I had a right to review the process to ensure everything was done legally, civil, calm, clean. But behind the scenes, we were building something much bigger. Jenna reached out to her friend in the Department of Child Services. That friend put us in touch with someone who worked in fraud investigation, and that's where everything started to snowball. Because the moment they pulled Leanne's adoption file, red flags started popping up. The psych eval that claimed I was mentally unfit, it was signed by a doctor who hadn't practiced in 10 years. The signature on the parental termination form, it didn't match the one on my hospital paperwork, not even close. And the witness listed on the surrender form didn't exist. A fake name, no license, no employment record, nothing. Malcolm said we were looking at a multi-layered fraud case. If we could prove criminal intent, and we were getting close, Leanne could face real jail time, and depending on how involved my dad was, he might too. But here's the thing, we didn't tell them we were coming. The entire investigation was happening quietly, behind their backs. We needed to catch them flat-footed. If we showed our hand too early, Leanne would find a way to twist it. She always did. And then, the universe handed me a gift I never saw coming. Jenna was scrolling through Facebook one night, looking for something completely unrelated, when she stumbled on a tagged photo from a neighborhood picnic 2 weeks earlier. It was Leanne, smiling, posing with 2 other moms, and in her arms was a baby girl. Maybe it was the angle, maybe it was fate, but the moment I saw that photo, I felt it in my gut. That was my daughter. She had my mouth, my exact nose, that same little swirl of hair on the side of her head that my mom used to say skipped generations. I started shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone, and then I saw the caption, "Leanne and baby Emmeline, 6 months old and already a little diva." Emmeline, she changed her, but I didn't care. I didn't care what she called her, because now I had something I didn't have before. Visual proof. The photo had a timestamp. It confirmed Leanne had a baby in her care at the exact same time she claimed I had a stillbirth. That one picture, that single tag, was enough to crack everything open. Malcolm submitted it with our case file the next morning, and within 48 hours, a court date was set. Leanne had no idea what was coming, but soon, she was going to have to stand in front of a judge and explain exactly where she got that baby. The court date was set for a Tuesday morning. It was a custody hearing on paper, but really, it was a battlefield. Malcolm told me not to expect a big dramatic moment like in movies. Most of these things start slow. Paperwork, motions, procedure. But even he couldn't hide how tense he was that morning. We arrived early, dressed formally, Jenna holding my hand like she was anchoring me to the ground. My chest was tight. I hadn't slept in 2 nights. I kept thinking about that photo, about my baby girl being passed around like some accessory at a neighborhood barbecue, while I'd been grieving a death that never happened. Leanne showed up 10 minutes before the hearing, wearing pearls, a pale blue cardigan, and that signature smug smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. My dad was with her. He looked older, pale, like he hadn't been sleeping either, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't say a word to either of them. I just sat down and stared straight ahead. The judge entered and we all rose. A middle-aged woman, stern and sharp, with reading glasses she wore low on her nose and a no-nonsense tone. After introductions and the usual, Malcolm stood up and began presenting a case. First, the medical records. He walked the judge through my delivery document, confirmation of a live birth, discharge records, no death certificate on file. Then he moved to the adoption. That's when he started pointing out the inconsistencies, the forged psych eval, the invalid witness signature, the backdated forms with falsified timestamps, and finally the Facebook photo, dated 6 months earlier, showing Leanne holding a baby who looked exactly like me, matching the age and birth date on my hospital records. Leanne's lawyer stood up, trying to object, claiming everything had been verified through proper channels. The judge shut her down fast. Then the judge turned to me. She asked me to speak, just a few words. I stood up on shaking legs, heart pounding so loud it felt like it was echoing through the walls. I told her everything, how I was isolated during my pregnancy, how I never saw my baby, how I was told she died while I was still sedated, how I wasn't allowed to grieve, or speak, or ask questions, how I found the adoption files by accident, how every day since then had felt like living in someone else's stolen dream. When I finished, I sat down. The whole courtroom was quiet. Even Leanne had gone pale, and then something happened never expected. My dad spoke, unprompted, unplanned. He stood up, shaky, and said he had something to confess. He admitted he knew the baby had survived, that Leanne told him I had suffered a breakdown, that I refused to hold the baby or sign the birth certificate, that I wanted to forget the whole thing happened, and that she, Leanne, had done the right thing by adopting the child herself. He said he believed her, because he wanted to, because it was easier than confronting the truth. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in over a year, and I'll never forget what he said next. I didn't protect you, and I let her steal our granddaughter. I'm sorry. It didn't fix anything, but it cracked something in that courtroom, because once he admitted he knew, it was over. The judge didn't even call a recess. She ordered immediate emergency review of the adoption, appointed a child advocate, froze Leanne's custody rights pending further investigation, and granted me temporary guardianship until the legal process was resolved. It wasn't full custody. It wasn't forever. But it meant one thing. My daughter was coming home with me. They brought her to me the next morning. A social worker escorted her to Jenna's house around 9 a.m. She rang the doorbell twice. I already knew it was them. I had been sitting by the window since sunrise, knees curled to my chest, heart racing, palms soaked. When I opened the door, I couldn't breathe. There she was. Tiny, wide-eyed, clinging to a pink blanket, looking up at me with the kind of cautious curiosity only a baby can give. Her hair was dark and wispy, tied up in a loose little puff at the top, and her eyes were mine. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, and I dropped to my knees. The social worker crouched beside me, gently introducing me as someone very special, and handed her over. I held my daughter for the first time. Her name was listed as Emmeline on the records, but I whispered Mira against her forehead, over and over again like a prayer. I didn't care what name Leanne had forced onto her documents. I knew who she was, and she didn't resist me. She didn't cry. She just nestled into my arms like she'd been waiting for me too. I broke down. For the first time since that night in the hospital, I let it all out. The grief, the rage, the months of silence, all of it. Jenna cried too. She stood behind me, hand on my shoulder, whispering that we'd be okay now. We spent the whole day together. Mira sat on my lap while I fed her little spoonfuls of oatmeal and watched her tiny hands explore everything in sight. She giggled at the jingling of my bracelet, fell asleep, curled against my chest. It wasn't perfect. She didn't know me. Not really. But something in her recognized me. It wasn't magical. It was just right. And that night, while she was sleeping beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to fight to... I was going to make sure no one else ever had to go through what I did. The fallout was brutal. Leanne was charged with multiple counts of fraud, custodial interference, and perjury. They discovered forged psychiatric evaluations, fake witness affidavits, and even one attempted bribe of a hospital staffer. Once that came out, other skeletons started falling out of her closet. She'd done similar manipulative things to a niece on her side of the family, tried to obtain guardianship after convincing the girl's parents she was unfit. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. My dad cooperated with the investigation. He handed over emails, phone records, and even the signed checks Leanne had used to grease her way through legal loopholes. I don't know if he did it out of guilt or fear of prison, but I didn't care. He wasn't charged, but he lost everything anyway. He filed for divorce 2 months later, tried to reach out to me after that. I didn't answer. Mira and I moved into a small apartment with Jenna while the legal custody process finished. 6 weeks later, I was granted full parental rights. The day the court order came through, I went outside and screamed. It's been 7 months since then. I'm in college now, online for the moment, but working towards something real. I've started speaking with advocacy groups. There are people who dedicate their lives to uncovering illegal adoption, coercion cases, medical consent, and they want me to speak. Mira's doing amazing. She's walking, talking in broken words, calls Jenna Nini, and has this giggle that makes strangers stop and smile. She doesn't know what happened to her. One day, I'll have to tell her. I think about that. How do you explain to your daughter that someone stole her? How do you tell her she was raised by the woman who told her mother she was dead? I don't know, but I'll be the one to tell her, not the courts, not a stranger, me, because I'm her mother. And this time, no one gets to rewrite that story but us.